My mom told me to leave my cheating fiancé. She forgot to mention why. It was a Tuesday, one of those perfectly mundane evenings that feel like a warm hug. The scent of garlic and basil hung in the air from the pasta sauce I was simmering. My fiancé, Mark, was due home any minute, and the soft glow of the fairy lights strung across our balcony painted our little apartment in a dreamy haze. Life was, for lack of a better word, perfect. We had the house with the white picket fence all picked out, the wedding venue booked, a future so bright it practically needed sunglasses. I was head over heels, stupidly in love, the kind of love that makes you blind to any and all flaws. Or so I thought. Mark's phone buzzed on the granite countertop, a sharp, insistent vibration that cut through the domestic bliss. He was in the shower, singing some off-key 80s rock ballad, and I glanced at the screen, expecting a work email or a notification from his fantasy football league. It wasn't. It was a text message preview from a contact saved simply as D. The message itself was short, but it landed like a punch to the gut. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? My blood ran cold. The pasta sauce began to splatter, forgotten on the stove. My heart, which moments before had been floating on a cloud of domestic bliss, plummeted into a pit of icy dread. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic and hope, that this message wasn't for me. Mark hadn't been with me last night. He'd been out with his buddies from work, a guy's night that had run late. I'd been asleep when he finally slipped into bed, smelling faintly of whiskey and, I now realized, someone else's perfume. Or maybe cologne. The thought was a splinter in my mind, sharp and foreign. I felt a physical urge to throw his phone against the wall, to smash it into 1,000 pieces and pretend I'd never seen it. But I didn't. My fingers, trembling uncontrollably, reached for it. The passcode was our anniversary, a date that now felt like a cruel joke. I unlocked it. The messages from D were a waterfall of filth and intimacy, a secret world I had no idea existed. They talked about meeting in hotels, about the things they'd done, the things they wanted to do. There were pictures too, intimate and damning. My vision swam. The man I loved, the man I was going to marry, was a stranger. This perfect life we'd built was just a movie set, and I had just stumbled behind the curtain. I don't remember calling my mom. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on the cool tile of the kitchen floor, the phone pressed to my ear, the sound of the shower still running in the background. I was sobbing, these horrible gut-wrenching gasps that felt like they were tearing my body apart. I managed to choke out the words between sobs. He's cheating. I found texts. Mom, he's cheating on me. I expected sympathy. I expected the usual motherly platitudes. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. You deserve better. I'm on my way. I got none of that. Instead, there was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy and profound that my own crying hitched in my throat. Then, my mom's voice came through, low and hard, stripped of all its usual warmth. It was a voice I had never heard before, a voice laced with a fury so cold it was terrifying. "Leave him," she said. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, sharp and absolute. Pack a bag right now, go to your sister's, do not talk to him, do not ask him any questions, just leave. I'll call you back in 5 minutes. The line went dead. I was left kneeling on the floor, in the ruins of my perfect life, more confused by my mother's reaction than by the betrayal itself. The shower shut off. The sound of water ceasing was like a gunshot in the silent apartment, jolting me from my stupor. My mom's words echoed in my head, a strange, chilling mantra. Leave him, now. Every instinct I had screamed at me to do the opposite, to confront him, to throw the phone in his face, to watch him squirm and demand answers. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he'd been caught. I wanted a fight, a screaming match, some cathartic explosion to match the one happening inside my own chest. But my mom's voice, that unfamiliar, steely tone, held me in place. It was an order from a general, not a suggestion from a mother. Why was she so angry? It wasn't just protective fury, this was something deeper, something personal. I scrambled up from the floor, my mind a chaotic whirlwind. I clicked Mark's phone screen on again, my eyes scanning the incriminating messages. The contact D. Who was D? A woman from work? A random hookup? The messages were intense, full of a shared history and inside jokes I didn't understand. They referenced a past, before us, that made my stomach churn. How long had this been going on? Was our entire relationship a lie? I felt like an idiot, a fool who had been performing in a play where I was the only one who didn't have the script. The bathroom door opened. Mark walked out, a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair still damp. He smiled when he saw me, that easy, charming smile that had made me fall in love with him. "Something smells amazing," he said, his voice cheerful and oblivious. He was walking towards me, towards the kitchen, towards his phone, which was still clutched in my hand like a weapon. In that moment, I saw two paths diverging in front of me. The first led to a screaming match, a dramatic breakup scene, tears and accusations. The second was the path my mom had ordered me down, a quiet, swift, and mysterious exit. I chose the second path. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked into our bedroom, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I could hear his confused footsteps behind me. "Babe, everything okay?" I ignored him, pulling my largest suitcase from the top of the closet and throwing it onto the bed. The sound of the wheels hitting the mattress was loud and final. I started yanking clothes from the drawers, not caring what I grabbed, just stuffing handfuls of fabric into the bag. Jeans, t-shirts, a sweater he'd bought me for my birthday that I now wanted to burn. "What are you doing?" Mark was standing in the doorway now, his smile gone, replaced by a look of confusion and dawning horror. He saw the suitcase, the frantic way I was packing, and his face paled. He knew. He had to know. I still couldn't bring myself to speak. My throat was tight with unshed tears and unspoken rage. I just kept packing, my movements jerky and mechanical. I grabbed my toiletries from the bathroom, my laptop from the desk, my purse from the hook by the door. I was a robot, executing a program my mom had installed in my brain with a single furious phone call. As I wheeled the suitcase towards the front door, he finally found his voice. It was a weak, trembling thing. "Please, just talk to me." I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. I turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since I'd seen those texts. I saw the man I loved, but I also saw a stranger, a deceiver. I saw the ghost of the person he was with D. I opened my mouth, the words "I know" right there on the tip of my tongue. But my mom's command was stronger. "Do not talk to him." So I just shook my head, a single sharp motion. I pulled the door open and walked out, leaving him standing there in the ruins of our life together. I didn't look back. I drove to my parents' house, the city lights blurring through my tears, my mind racing with a single, overwhelming question. What did my mother know that I didn't? The drive to my parents' house was a blur of streetlights and silent, gut-wrenching sobs. Every song on the radio was a love song. Every couple I saw walking down the street was a personal insult. The world felt like it was playing a cruel joke on me. By the time I pulled into their familiar driveway, the initial shock had hardened into a dull, throbbing ache of betrayal. I killed the engine and just sat there for a moment, staring at the warm light glowing from the living room window. It was a beacon of safety, but I knew that the moment I walked inside, I would be walking into a different kind of storm. My mom's reaction was still a complete mystery, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. I finally gathered the strength to get out of the car, grabbing my purse and leaving the suitcase in the trunk. I didn't need clothes right now. I needed answers. I walked to the front door, my key feeling heavy and unfamiliar in my hand. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet. My dad was usually in his recliner watching the news, but the living room was empty. Then I saw her. My mom was standing at the far end of the hallway, her arms crossed over her chest. She wasn't crying, she wasn't rushing to hug me. She was just watching me, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and profound sorrow. She didn't say a word. She just turned and walked into the den, expecting me to follow. I did, my heart pounding with a nervous anticipation that was almost worse than the heartbreak. The den was my mom's sanctuary, filled with books and comfortable old furniture. She was already sitting on the love seat, and on the coffee table in front of her was an object that made no sense. It was a large, leather-bound photo album, the kind that looked ancient and important, its corners worn smooth with age. It wasn't one of our family albums. I'd never seen it before. She patted the cushion next to her. I sat down, my body rigid with confusion. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then she reached out and opened the photo album. The pages were thick and yellowed, and the photographs were the faded, square-shaped kind from the 70s. The first picture showed a group of young people laughing on a college campus. My mom was there, her hair long and feathered, her smile wide and carefree. She pointed to herself, then to a handsome young man standing next to her, his arms slung casually around her shoulders. He had a familiar jawline, a familiar way of smiling. "That's Daniel," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "We were best friends in college." She turned the page. More photos of the group, of my mom and Daniel. They looked incredibly close, their body language speaking of a deep, easy intimacy. I was still trying to figure out the point of this history lesson. Was Daniel an old boyfriend? Was this some kind of weird way of telling me that everyone gets their heart broken? She turned another page, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a different kind of photo, a formal family portrait. There was Daniel, looking older and more serious. He had his arm around a beautiful, stern-looking woman, and in front of them, a little boy of about 6 or 7, with a shy smile and the same familiar eyes as the man in the older photos. I stared at the little boy's face, the shape of his nose, the curve of his lips. It was unmistakable. It was Mark. My brain short-circuited. What was going on? Why was my mom showing me old photos of Mark's dad? My mom must have seen the dawning realization on my face because she finally looked me directly in the eye. Her gaze was intense, unwavering. Daniel and his wife, they had a very complicated marriage. It ended badly, very badly. She took Mark and just disappeared, cut all contact. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. She took a deep breath,
and what she said next shattered my world into a million pieces. Mark's father is Daniel, and the man he was cheating on you with, the D in his phone, is Daniel too. The room started to spin. The man my fiancé was having an affair with was his own father. The world didn't just stop, it fractured. The pieces of my reality, the carefully constructed narrative of my life, were floating in a zero-gravity void, each one a sharp, jagged shard of impossibility. My fiancé was cheating on me with a man. That man was his own father. The two sentences collided in my brain, creating a logical paradox that my mind refused to process. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the coffee table to keep from sliding off the couch. The faded photographs of the smiling young man, Daniel, now seemed to mock me, their cheerful innocence a grotesque mask for a horror I couldn't comprehend. My mom's hand found mine, her grip firm and grounding. She didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. She just held my hand, a silent anchor in the storm of my comprehension, and began to talk. Her voice was low and measured, as if she were narrating a story she had rehearsed 1,000 times, a story she had hoped she would never have to tell. She explained that she and Daniel had been inseparable in college, sharing dreams, secrets, and late-night study sessions. She knew him better than anyone, she said. She knew he was gay long before he was willing to admit it to himself. She told me about the immense pressure Daniel was under from his wealthy, conservative family. They had a vision for his life, a prominent career, a beautiful wife, 2.5 kids, the whole American dream facade. Anything less was a humiliation. So Daniel tried to force himself into that mold. He met a woman, fell into a sort of pragmatic friendship with her, and they married. Mark was born a year later. On the outside, they were the perfect family. But on the inside, my mom explained, Daniel was suffocating. He was living a lie, and the resentment and unhappiness curdled into something toxic. The affair, when his wife finally discovered it, wasn't with another man from a secret life. It was with a coworker, a fumbling, desperate attempt to feel something real. The discovery was cataclysmic. The divorce was not just messy, it was a nuclear explosion. His wife, a woman my mom described as fiercely protective and pragmatic, was less angry about the infidelity and more horrified by the underlying truth of Daniel's life. But there was something else. My mom's voice dropped even lower. Something that made the divorce truly apocalyptic. She had discovered Daniel's inappropriate relationship with their son. My mom stressed that it wasn't what I was thinking. Not then. Not in the overt criminal sense. It was more insidious, more psychological. She described a father who was blurring the lines, treating his young son not as a child, but as a confidant, a surrogate partner. He would share things with Mark that a child should never hear, creating an unhealthy, enmeshed bond. He was grooming him, my mom said, planting seeds of a twisted dependency that she, Mark's mother, knew would one day bloom into something monstrous if she didn't intervene. That was why she ran. She didn't just take her son and leave a cheating husband. She was rescuing him from a predator. She changed their names, moved across the country, and severed all ties, disappearing so thoroughly that even my mom, her closest friend, lost track of them for years. As my mom finished her story, a chilling clarity began to dawn. Mark's mother had died a few years ago from a sudden illness. He had been devastated, alone. He must have started looking for his father then, searching for the parental figure he had lost.
And Daniel, the predator, had found him. He had slithered back into his son's life, preying on his grief and vulnerability, resuming the sick, manipulative dynamic he had started all those years ago. The complicated situation Mark had alluded to, the intense connection he shared with Dee, it wasn't a new affair. It was the reawakening of a lifelong, deeply ingrained abuse. My mom's fury wasn't just about a cheating fiancé. It was the rage of a woman who was watching a nightmare she thought had been buried decades ago rise from the grave to claim someone else she loved. Her face turned pale, her eyes distant. "There's more," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's a reason I was so furious. It's not just about the cheating. It's about what happened after the divorce. It's about why his mother was so terrified." She was about to reveal another, darker layer to this already unimaginable horror. The air in the den grew thick, heavy with the weight of a secret so profound it felt like it had its own gravitational pull. My mom's face was a mask of grim resolve, the lines around her mouth etched with a memory that had clearly haunted her for decades. I thought I had reached the bottom of this abyss of horror, but as I looked at her, I realized we were still standing on the precipice. The story of Daniel's psychological manipulation of his son was already monstrous, a violation of the most sacred trust. But my mom's next words plunged us into a darkness so absolute it was suffocating. She explained that Mark's mother, in her desperate flight to protect her son, hadn't just vanished. She had left behind evidence, a kind of insurance policy. She had been terrified that Daniel would use his wealth and influence to hunt them down, to twist the narrative and paint her as an unstable, hysterical woman who had kidnapped their child. So she had documented everything. Journals detailing Daniel's inappropriate behavior, recordings of conversations where he discussed his disturbingly possessive love for his son, and letters she had written to my mom, letters that were a raw, terrified chronicle of her discovery of her husband's true nature. My mom's role in all of this, I learned, was more significant than I could have ever imagined. She hadn't just been a supportive friend, she had been an accomplice. She had helped Mark's mother create a new identity, had funneled her money, and had been the keeper of this damning evidence. She had sworn an oath to protect Mark and his mother, to be the silent guardian of their new life. For years, she had lived with this secret, looking over her shoulder, every strange phone call or unexpected visitor a potential threat. When I called her, sobbing about Mark cheating, her mind hadn't immediately gone to a simple affair. The mention of a mysterious D, the intensity of it, it had triggered a deeply buried alarm. Her fury, I now understood, was a tidal wave. It was the terror of a promise broken, the rage of a protector who had failed. She wasn't just angry at Mark for cheating on me. She was enraged at Daniel for finding his son, for succeeding where she and Mark's mother had fought so hard to keep him out. She was furious at the universe for allowing this cycle of abuse to restart. Her cold, hard command to leave him immediately wasn't just about saving me from a broken heart. It was a tactical maneuver, a desperate attempt to get me out of the line of fire before I got entangled in a decades-old war. She had looked at the situation and seen not a love triangle, but a predator and his prey, and she had reacted with the primal, ferocious instinct of a mother protecting her cub. As she finished her explanation, her voice trembling with the memory of it all, a sound cut through the heavy silence. It was my phone, buzzing insistently in my purse. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs. I expected it to be Mark, probably calling from a dozen different numbers, begging me to talk to him. But the screen showed an unknown number. A new text message lit up the display. My blood ran cold as I read the 3 short, simple words. It wasn't a plea or an apology. It was a command. We need to talk. All of us. Bring your mother. The message was from Daniel. He knew I was with my mom. He wasn't just trying to get me back. He was involving himself, pulling my mother directly back into the conflict she had spent half her life escaping. The hunt was over. He had found us. The text message hung in the air between us, a digital ghost with a chilling real-world presence. Bring your mother. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. Daniel wasn't just a man who had committed an unspeakable act with his own son. He was a manipulator, a hunter who had just cornered his prey. My first instinct was terror, a primal urge to run, to pack a bag and disappear just like Mark's mother had done. But my mom's reaction surprised me. The fear on her face was replaced by a steely, almost unnerving calm. She had been running from this man for decades, but now, faced with him directly, she seemed to find a reservoir of strength I had never witnessed. She looked at me, her eyes clear and focused. "We're not running," she said, her voice firm. "Running is what he expects. It's what gives him power. We end this now." She took my phone and typed a reply, her fingers moving with a deliberate precision. "Fine, tomorrow, 10 a.m., the coffee shop on Maple and Main, public place." She hit send and placed the phone back on the table, a general finalizing her battle plan. The next 24 hours were a blur of tense silence and hushed preparation. My dad was briefed, his face a mask of grim anger as he insisted on being nearby, just in case. My mom and I barely spoke, but we didn't need to. We were a unit, bound by a terrible secret and a shared resolve. The next morning, we walked into the coffee shop, the bell above the door chiming a cheerful, incongruous note. The place was moderately busy, the air filled with the rich scent of coffee and the low murmur of conversation. And there they were, sitting at a small table in the corner. Daniel was even more handsome in person than in the faded photographs, his silvering hair giving him an air of distinguished authority. He had a charismatic smile, but it didn't reach his eyes, which were a cold, calculating blue. And next to him, looking small and broken, was Mark. He wouldn't meet my gaze, his shoulders slumped, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup as if it were a life raft. We sat down across from them. The silence that fell over our table was so thick it felt like a physical presence. It was Daniel who broke it, his voice smooth as silk, laced with a condescending charm that made my skin crawl. He didn't acknowledge the texts or the affair. Instead, he began to spin a narrative, a beautiful, twisted story of a father and son who had been tragically separated, who had found each other again and discovered a love so profound and special that it transcended the petty judgments of society. He painted their relationship as a beautiful, misunderstood romance, and he looked at me with a pitying expression, as if I were a small-minded child who couldn't appreciate such a unique bond. He then turned his attention to my mom, his charming mask slipping just enough to reveal the threat beneath. He spoke of old times, of shared secrets, his words a not-so-subtle reminder that he knew about her role in helping his ex-wife disappear. He was trying to intimidate her, to remind her that he could expose her, to make her back down. But he had underestimated my mother. She listened to his entire monologue, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She just looked him dead in the eye and began to speak, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. She didn't talk about societal judgments or transcendent love. She talked about a scared young woman and her vulnerable little boy.
She talked about the journals, the letters, the evidence she had kept safe for all these years. She reminded him of the promise he had made, the one to leave his son alone and let him have a normal life. He dismantled his beautiful narrative piece by piece, replacing it with the ugly, sordid truth of his manipulative predation. As she spoke, I saw Mark begin to stir. He looked from his father's confident face to my mom's resolute one, and something inside him seemed to break. For the first time, he wasn't just a victim, he was a witness. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. He wasn't talking to me or my mom, he was looking at his father. "Stop," he said, his voice trembling but gaining strength with each word. "Just stop. It wasn't love. You broke me. You found me when I was lost, and you broke me all over again." The mask on Daniel's face finally shattered. The charming smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked at my mom, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "You should have stayed out of this, Eleanor," he snarled, his voice a low growl. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over with a loud clatter, and stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. The threat was no longer implicit, it was hanging in the air, a dark cloud over all of us. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed again, marking Daniel's dramatic exit, and the four of us were left in a bubble of tense, suffocating silence. My mom, my dad, who had appeared at our table the instant Daniel left, and me, and Mark, who was now staring into his empty coffee cup as if it held the answers to a life of questions he'd never known how to ask. The immediate danger had passed, but the threat Daniel had issued lingered, a toxic residue in the air. My mom, however, seemed to shed the weight of the confrontation with a visible sigh. She looked tired, but not afraid. The power had shifted. My dad put a reassuring hand on my mom's shoulder, his presence a silent testament to the strength of their partnership. He had been her rock through this secret for years, and he was here now. My mom turned her attention to Mark. Her expression wasn't angry, but it was firm, devoid of any pity. She told him in no uncertain terms that he needed professional help, that the decades of manipulation and abuse had created a prison in his mind that only he could learn to dismantle with the right guidance. She gave him the name of a therapist, a specialist in this kind of complex trauma, and told him that his path to healing was his own to walk, but that he had to take the first step. Then it was my turn. There was so much I wanted to say, so much anger, so much hurt, so much betrayal. But looking at him now, hunched and broken, all I felt was a profound, aching sadness. The man I loved was gone, and in his place was this stranger, a victim of a crime so twisted it was hard to fathom. I spoke to him for the last time, not as his fiancé, but as a ghost from a life he could no longer have. I told him I didn't hate him, but I couldn't be a part of his recovery. I needed to recover myself. I wished him luck, a genuine, if distant, hope that he could find his way out of the darkness his father had trapped him in. He just nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. We parted ways there, in that coffee shop, two people whose futures had been irrevocably shattered by a single, monstrous secret. In the car on the way home, I finally asked my mom the question that had been burning in my mind since Daniel's threat. "Aren't you scared? What he said?" She shook her head, a small, confident smile playing on her lips. She told me that Daniel's threat was empty. The evidence she had, the letters and journals from Mark's mother, was a nuclear bomb. If he tried to come after us, to expose her role in their disappearance, she would expose him for what he truly was, a predatory abuser who had destroyed his own son. He had more to lose than she did. The game of cat and mouse was over, and she held all the cards. The weeks and months that followed were not easy. The trauma of it all was a heavy cloak I had to learn to shed, one thread at a time. There were good days and bad days. Days where the grief for the life I thought I had was so overwhelming I could barely get out of bed. But through it all, my mom was my anchor. Our bond, already strong, was now forged in fire. I understood her fury now. It wasn't an overreaction. It was the roar of a warrior who had been called back to a battle she had already won.
She had saved me, not just from a cheating fiancé, but from a legacy of abuse that I had been one step away from marrying into. I'm single now, living in a small apartment that's all my own. The white picket fence is gone, the wedding dress is donated, and the future I had planned is a distant memory. But I'm not broken. I'm free. I'm free from a lie, free from a facade, free from a man who was never truly his own person. The perfect life I thought I had was a fantasy, but the real life I'm building now, a life built on a foundation of hard-won truth and supported by the fierce, unwavering love of my mother, is more real and more precious than anything I ever could have imagined. I thought I had lost everything, but in the end, I found out what was truly worth keeping.